Hi, Randy. Hi, folks. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm so impressed at the organization of everybody that's already here. You had your link ready to go. You were online. Good for you. We'll give it a couple minutes for the folks that aren't as organized to find their links and hop on. Oh, it's also only 1:59. Welcome. As folks are coming in, just to let you know, we're going to give it a minute, give everybody a chance to find their link and log on before we get started. Welcome, Carol. Thanks for dropping your name in the chat. I would love for everybody to drop in their name, and if you're with an organization, the org you're with, or where you're located, if you're not with an org. It's always great to see where in the world people are coming in from. Welcome, Bridget. Welcome, Lori. Hello. I know I say this every time, but I can't help it. It makes me think of Romper Room. I see you, boys and girls. Two folks from Waterloo, Iowa. Welcome. I assume you know each other. All right. I'm gonna give it another minute. Hi. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope that you are somewhere that is relatively warm and the weather is treating you well. It is actually no longer horrendously frigid here in Pittsburgh in the Northeast, but it is a gray day. Give it one more minute. Nice to see everyone here. 55 degrees is cold in California, but that would be balmy right now. I think my bathroom is 55 degrees right now. We bought a house last year and there's no insulation between our floor and our basement, which we're going to have to remedy because it is cold in there. All right. Welcome. All right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get started. The webinar is being recorded, so just so you know, we will send this out. a few days after today, after the webinar. So you will have access to a recording if you want to go back and check something out, if you missed it and didn't get a chance to write it down. A few notes before we get started. Drop your questions in the Q&A. Don't put them in the chat. Put them in the Q&A. Sometimes the chat goes by really fast and it's hard to grab those. So when it's in the Q&A, we can see it. We're not going to lose it. We'll be able to get to it. And then at the end of the webinar, we will provide you some links to request a follow-up meeting, as well as a link to register for our next webinar, maybe our next 2 webinars. Not sure about that, Karen. We'll find out. It'll be a surprise for everybody. How exciting. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And so this webinar is about how to start a food rescue. And this is the first in a series of 6 that we're going to do. And we've in the past done a bunch of webinars on how to start a food rescue, but they're always one-offs. And we just talk for about 30 minutes about how to start. And it's a lot of information for a very little bit of time. And then over the course of the year, we get a lot of questions. And I'm sure I saw some folks on here that are part of, working in robust food recovery organizations. That's a question we all get a lot, is how to start a food rescue. How do I make this happen in my own community? So we thought we would break this up into 6 different episodes or lessons, and we'll have some, I want to say, guest stars. We'll have some guest speakers in here to talk a little bit about their experience and to give you sort of a more well-rounded understanding of what's involved. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what does it mean to start a food recovery, right? A lot of times, folks hear about food rescue, they're aware of food waste, and they get excited and they think, okay, I want to do this in my community. And what the perception of food recovery is that it's, going to pick up at a grocery store once a week and taking produce or bread to a food pantry. And that is something that actually does happen. A lot of food pantries, a lot of churches have a relationship with the local grocery store, and where they're picking up donated food to serve their congregation or their community. That, though, really is focusing on the needs of that nonprofit and the people it serves, which is great. I mean, it's a super, super legitimate, wonderful thing to do. But when we talk about food recovery, what we mean is taking that and scaling it. It's a systems approach to focusing on both reducing food insecurity, but also reducing food waste. So it's really looking at, how do you take that like one-off, once a week rescue and scale that so that we're measurably impacting food waste in our community, and in return, food security as well. And to do that, to create that high impact food recovery, we do actually want to have a measurable impact in our community on both of those things, right? So again, food waste, it's a major contributor to CO2. We've talked about this a lot. It's one of the reasons why food waste is a focus of the UN sustainability goals. One of the reasons why, at least in the past, the federal government and a lot of states are focusing on it, is because food waste is something that's super, I don't want to say easy to tackle, but it's manageable, right? It's manageable to figure out how to take food out of the waste stream and thereby really make a measurable impact on the trajectory of climate change. And then, of course, on the flip side of that, 1 in 8 Americans are food insecure. And that number changes over time. We may see that rise if there's cuts in federal programs that are supporting people who are facing food insecurity. So that number could go up in the next year or 2. Certain populations, certain areas, it's higher. But it's persistent. It's always there. When we think about high impact food recovery, we're looking at scaling how much food we're picking up from the number of places in a community, right, to impact the amount of CO2 that's being emitted, and getting that to people who are food insecure to help impact hunger, food access, food security in your community. So when you decide, okay, that's great, that's what I want to do, I want to put in that effort, I want to scale that food recovery, I want to tackle this problem, there's really kind of 5 pieces to that. The first is organization building, right? That's thinking about staffing and funding and getting a 501c3 status. It's the boring stuff. It's the managerial stuff. It is the like literal organization building. It's not as exciting as going and picking up food, but it's critical to building a strong foundation for your food recovery. Secondly, it's reducing food waste, and that means getting donors. How are you working with your local retail or wholesale community, your local institutions, to partner with them to reduce food waste at their location? It's transportation. In our case, in some cases, it's recruiting volunteers. It could be buying a fleet, buying a truck. That's a really steep barrier to entry. So a lot of times, especially in the early days, food recovery organizations, new ones will focus on volunteers, or they'll do it themselves. So they'll work on it, or they'll, have their staff do it. But figuring out how you're going to get that food from point A of the donor to point B of the nonprofit is a critical part of that building of that program. Fourth is distributions. It's building that distribution network. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. We'll touch on it a little bit today, but we'll get into it a lot more in a future session, because that's the part a lot of times folks forget about. You think, okay, I'm going to start food rescue. I'm going to go pick up food and I'm going to take it to the local food pantry or to the local shelter or soup kitchen. Bada bing, bada boom, we're done. It's actually a lot more complicated than that, because if there has not been a ramp up of food recovery in your community, there's probably not the framework, the infrastructure for distributing that. So we'll talk about how to fix that in the future. And then finally, data. This is easy to forget. You need data to tell your story, to understand what you're doing and the impact that you're having, to go after funding, to get supporters, to improve your program, right? To really know what you're doing and what the next steps are. And I include that here because I think it's really important from the start to remember that data is critical. So as I said, we're going to have six webinars in this series, and to give you a sense of where we're going. So, I know there's questions I'm not going to answer today, but we are going to answer them in future sessions. So next one is funding. Funding is critical. We're going to talk about that early because you really need that funding in order to build that organization. If you want a really high impact food recovery, you're going to need the funds to pay your staff, right? Second, building operations, specifically focusing on food donors. How do you get food donors? How do you convince them to work with you? What do you need to do in order to inspire confidence in food donors so they will work with your organization? Building operations from the distribution side, as I just mentioned, you need to work on that. It's not just a simple matter of talking to local food pantries and distributing, dropping off food at their door. 5, we'll talk about essential extras. These are a lot of times things that are backburnered when you think about, okay, well, there's food that needs to be picked up. I'm going to go get it. Like there's a lot of urgent exigencies that are happening when you're doing food recovery. People have food they want out of their storeroom, out of their kitchen. They're calling you. You got to get there in 2 hours. Like you're really focused on that, like urgent part of it. And these things sometimes fade into the background, but again, these are critical, and that is marketing and then board development, having a strong board of directors, because that strong board of directors will help make sure that your organization has what it needs to grow. And they can provide a lot of extra support and a lot of things like financial advice, legal advice, marketing advice that you would otherwise have to pay for. And then finally, in the last session, we will look at the big picture again and pull this all together and talk about, what are the next steps. So for this one, again, for the introduction, let's talk a little bit about organization building. The first thing you really want to do if you're thinking about starting a food recovery in your community is, what is the structure of the org going to look like? is there already a food recovery organization or a organization that maybe is focused on food security, but not doing food recovery, but you could partner with them? Is there somebody that already exists? Do you have to start from scratch? Maybe you want to start from scratch. Maybe there's an org that is kind of focused on small scale food rescue, but they're not interested in growing, right? Or they have very specific parameters that don't fit with you. Maybe they're only rescuing pastries or bread, or even only rescuing, meat or produce or prepared food or whatever it is. Maybe it's just not going to cover the bases you want to cover. So you really do need to start your own 501c3. There's advantages to both tracks. First, with starting a 501c3 of your own, a whole new baby organization, you don't have to find a partner, right? So you have a lot of control over that. You have control over the timeline, the direction, all of the decisions that need to be made rest solely in your lap and your support group, your board, et cetera. And then you also have an opportunity to build a board of directors that is supportive of food recovery, because I've seen cases where, a staff of an organization and maybe even one or two board members get really excited about food recovery and kind of see the vision and back it. But there are other board members who don't want any part of it. And, they may or may not be right. It might be a distraction or a diversion from the mission that they've had for a number of years, and they don't want to do that. So if you are starting from scratch, you don't have to overcome those objections. You can build your board from scratch to make sure that it is supportive of food recovery entirely. And then, of course, you don't have to compete for funds within an organization. There's always competition for funding within a community, within an industry, but there can be competition within an organization as well. If you go to an organization that, for example, has food pantries, you have to compete with their budget as well. When you're putting energy into writing grants, are you writing for a grant that's going to support a food pantry or food recovery, right? You're really kind of splitting your energy and competing with your own self there. In that case, that's not going to happen if you're building your own 501c3. On the other hand, nesting within an existing organization has a much shorter runway. You don't have to go through all the steps of building a board, of applying for a 501c3 and doing all of the paperwork, all of that boring organization building, right? It's already done. They probably already have a organizational support staff. So you've got somebody that's doing fundraising, marketing, maybe even volunteer management, communications, all of those other things. And it's done. You don't have to build it out. You don't have to hire anybody. You don't have to be the one person that's doing 27 jobs in the organization that you started. There's a lot more support that way. And then finally, you have a jump start on volunteer pool. Most of those organizations probably already are using volunteers. Maybe not for food rescue, but if they're packing in a warehouse or volunteering at a pantry handing out food, those folks might transition into being your food recovery volunteers. Oops. Once you decide on which strategy you're going to pursue nesting or creating your own 501c3, I'm going to strongly recommend that you think about what your vision is for the organization and you plan for that growth, right? You build your business plan around where you want to be, not where you are. Think about how many staff you're really going to need at the end of the day. There's a lot of, there's a tendency in nonprofit work to say, I can do it all. We don't need to hire anybody. I'll wear all the hats. Anybody that's worked for a nonprofit knows that's true, right? But instead of, and this can be internal, right? You don't have to share this with anybody, but instead of thinking really conservatively, like what's the least I can get away with, think about what is it that you want. Write a business plan that will get you where you're going. You can always trim that down. You can always, lengthen the time it's going to take you to get to, fully operational or fully scaled, but don't immediately limit yourself by not planning for what that trajectory is. And then also You never know what you're going to get from a funder if you don't ask. If you go in with a conservative ask, they're going to give you a conservative award. Go in and ask for more. Go in and ask for that big picture that you need. Show them the full plan. I've seen organizations that have gone to a funder with a really great plan and get funded for multiple years. That's not going to happen if you don't tell them what you really need. So make sure you're thinking about that. And then as you're doing that, also anticipate what that impact looks like, because that's going to help you make make the argument to your funders, right? Understand that, with one staff, I think I can rescue X number of pounds. With 5 staff, I know that is that's multiplied by 10, not 5, right? We can do so much more. So kind of plot out not only your budget trajectory, but also your impact trajectory. That's going to help you make that growth, that's going to help you make that pitch for growth. And then know how to talk to funders. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this today because I have talked about this ad nauseum. I'm going to point you to where you can find it, but you need to understand why food recovery will be beneficial in your community, how it's additive, not duplicative. And this is a mistake that a lot of food recovery organizations make. We've certainly made it on a couple of times where we don't think about, when we're talking to a funder, they're already in the food security space, right? They're already investing in organizations. Why would they invest in you? You need to tell them what you're bringing to the table that's different and additive to the pool, not just better, right? Because there's already folks that are doing things competently. Like, we've got an incredible food bank here, right? We're not trying to replicate the food bank model. We are additive. We're doing something different. And that is key when you're talking to funders. This probably belongs before that. So excuse me for being out of order, but when you think about that planning for growth, and your what your staffing needs are, make sure that you're thinking along both tiers of organizational growth and support. So the first one is obviously it's food rescue operations, right? So, when you start out, it could be one person doing everything, just one single person founding this and doing everything. We've seen that a lot. We may have some founders on here that have worn every hat in the org until they recruited other people to help them. But once you start recruiting other people, you're going to need 2 levels of support, right? You're going to need those food rescue operations folks, and you're going to need that organizational support. And you don't want to wait to start building organizational support. That's really key. And it should not come, last after you fully build out your food rescue operations. Sure, an operations person is going to be real critical as a second person, but a third person is probably going to be organizational support. Oftentimes a development person or a communications person. And think about what your skills are as a founder. If you're really a solid development person, but you don't have a lot of experience in communications or in support like HR, bookkeeping, that sort of managerial stuff, right? Hire to fill in those gaps. And that probably should be about your 3rd or 4th hire, is somebody that's on that organizational side. Then from there, again, 2 people wearing lots of hats under the executive director, then you can start to build out those programs. So somebody that specializes in relationships, that does food donors or food donors and food distribution, somebody that's working on volunteers or transportation, and then sort of breaking those out. So as you're building your plan forward, your trajectory, think about that. Think about your hiring plan way before you get there. That's going to really help you build out. And also, something that can be really beneficial for startups is looking for folks who can grow in their position and wear lots of hats, right? So somebody that is coming out of maybe community organizing and did a lot of communications and volunteer management, but is super passionate about food recovery, might be a great second hire. Somebody for food recovery ops. They can work on the operations, but then they can also kind of help build some of the organizational pieces that you need. So thinking about, looking for folks that can fill multiple different slots. And if you're coming out of business or if you're coming out of a really mature organization, that sometimes feels counterintuitive, right? Those folks are looking for specialists. When you work for a 100-year-old nonprofit or a Fortune 500 company, right? People are really specialized in what they do. You have folks that are, in the HR department that do like one kind of HR, right? You can have HR departments that have multiple specialists. In a startup, you need generalists. You need people that are passionate, driven, talented, and can fill in multiple different places. And then you can build around those strengths. Oops, nope. See, Karen, I told you this was going to happen. I totally am sharing the wrong thing now. Okay, here we go. I normally I do not share my own slides for this very reason. I cannot think and talk and push buttons at the same time. Can you confirm that you still see what you're supposed to see on my screen? Okay, thank you, Omar. I appreciate that. At least I didn't hang up on the call. Some of you know I've done that before. So we have more resources. This is like a really brief introduction to getting started. We've got a lot more resources on our website. We've got some webinars that we did, for example, the investing in impact and changing the narrative on charity, what people don't get about food recovery. Those are going to help you talk about food rescue to funders so that they understand what the mission is about and how to, why you're additive, why they should support you. And we've got some other webinars that we've done about fundraising. We are going to talk more about that, but if you want to jump into some of these lessons ahead of time, there's lots of webinars on our website. Then there's also a ton of resources out there. There's so many great organizations right now that are talking about food waste, that have really great information about food recovery. Most of these are a little bit more general, but they're super helpful. You want to be really knowledgeable about food waste, about the food waste space, about food recovery, about hunger, about food security. You want to really be able to talk about all of those things. And so I really suggest digging into some of these sites or resources that you find in your community that can help you understand, what is being said, what is the language people are using, what is the latest development on, on this issue. So, take, for example, food waste. 10 years ago, we were talking about the impact of food waste based on, the CO2 or equivalency emitted from landfills, right? But ReFed's done a lot of work in the last couple of years to talk about the fact that 93% of the impact of food waste is actually upstream. It's in the manufacturing, the growing, the transportation of food that then gets wasted. And so really understanding how that conversation is evolving and shifting is really critical. So definitely check out some of these as you're thinking about how to talk about the issues to people in the community. So then after that, I've got some tips for success. The first thing is, be serious. You can end hunger. I mean, okay, you can't. It's like a systemic issue, but you can make sure that people in your community have enough to eat from day to day. I always talk about ending hunger as a verb, right? It's not something that just like you do once and it's over. It's something that happens over and over again. And so, as an example, we work in the housing authorities in Pittsburgh, the Allegheny County and the City of Pittsburgh housing authorities. And the City of Pittsburgh Housing Authority, I know a lot of you have probably already heard the story because I love it. We started working with them and we asked them for a letter about 6 months into our relationship because we were applying for a grant. We wanted them to just say, yeah, we were working with them. The letter that we got told us a story we had not heard. And that was that the housing authority had a food emergency fund for residents. So when a maintenance person went somewhere or a neighbor, realized their neighbor didn't have any money, they would call the housing authority and they had a fund, they would go buy them food. Within 6 months of starting to work with all of their communities, those calls dried up. They never got another call, ever. We ended hunger. In their words, we ended hunger in their community. Now, that's something we can't stop doing. It doesn't end tomorrow. We have to go back tomorrow and the next day and the next week with food, but you can. You can do that in your community if you are serious about scaling up and about making that impact. The second thing to know is that trust is currency. You have to be reliable. You have to show up. If you make a promise, if you say you're going to show up, you have to show up. If you burn those relationships, if you don't show up when you say you're going to show up, the food donors will lose confidence and they will not want to work with you. The distribution partners will, paint you as unreliable, and they will not be good partners back to you because you're letting down their community by not showing up. So you really have to build that trust from the beginning, which means don't overpromise. If you promise something, make sure you can deliver it. That being said, everybody's going to mess up. We all make mistakes. Things happen. When that happens, communicate. Call the donor, call the nonprofit partner, let them know what happened. Just be upfront and open with them and work it out from there. That helps build that trust. Because again, there's no such thing as perfection, but there is such a thing as reliability. And then food safety is part of that. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about operations, but you need to make sure that you understand from the get-go what food needs to be kept safe. If you're going to be rescuing food, you need to understand food safety. So if you're starting a food recovery organization and you're not ServSafe certified or don't have some food safety certification, I strongly advise you to go do that. You can talk the language that donors need to hear, and you can build your operations around that food safety. And then finally, and this is really core to our operations and our philosophy, and I've seen this with every other food recovery organization I've worked with, and that is dignity is paramount. The people that you serve are as important as your food donors and your volunteers and your financial donors. And you'll see this is true when we talk more about that distribution challenge, that finding enough places to distribute food is actually really difficult when you scale food recovery. But even beyond that, showing respect to where the organizations that are helping you achieve your mission of reducing food waste by distributing food is really important. And then dive in and get started. You don't need to spend a year writing a business plan. You might, but that shouldn't forestall any action at all. Start doing rescues. The first rescues we did were just us. We're just us and our friends going out and picking up from, I had a friend who worked at a restaurant in Delhi, and they always had bread, and she knew what I was working on and called and said, hey, can you come get this? That is literally the first recorded rescue that 412 Food Rescue ever did, recorded. So just get started. That's going to really help you. First of all, you got to walk the walk. You can't just say, I want to do this and have other people do the work. You need to do the rescues yourself. You need to understand what's challenging for your volunteers or your staff who are doing the rescues. You need to understand what the donors want, what's happening at the donor sites, what do they need, what are they asking for? And you're going to get a really different perspective on that when you're in the donor building. And same thing with your distribution partners. That's really helpful if you're going to start your food recovery organization, to just get out there and start doing rescues, because you're going to be able to understand how to build your operations around those partners, meaning you're going to build a really strong foundation for success. While you're doing that, you can write your business plan. While you're doing that, you can start talking about this on your social media sites or to funders or to whoever. But those things can happen at the same time. Don't wait until you have a fully formed organization to get started, because to be honest, that is very difficult. Funders want to know that you have an impact, that you know what you're talking about. You want to be able to take it to them and say, yeah, we're already doing this. We just need your support. And again, we're going to talk more extensively about food donors, but you might be getting started right now. You might already be doing this. So I want to talk a little bit about it. When you're identifying possible donors, that's the first step, obviously. Think outside the box. Sure, the grocery store is a great donor, but what about the college? What about the hospital? they've got food waste. There's lots of places that have food waste. Anywhere that food is being produced that to sell or serve to the public, then that is a great partner. And a lot of them have not been approached for food recovery and might be more interested and willing to be sort of your starter donor, right? Design a plan you can succeed with. As I said previously, don't promise something you can't do. I will tell you, I did not do that. That's not how we got started here. We signed on Giant Eagle, the local grocery store. They were excited to work with us. About the same time we signed on a bagel store. And I said, yeah, we can bring on every single one of the 9 Brugers in the area and 5 grocery stores in the same week. No, we can't. That doesn't work. We are lucky that they forgave us for that startup foible. Don't do that. Design a plan that you can succeed with, and then create a strategy for onboarding that will work with the staff and the volunteers and the distributors that you have. They'll forgive you for going slow if it means success. And then when you're talking to donors, ask them what they want. Right? We've got a lot of webinars on this, on how to talk to donors, but I can't stress enough. Ask them what they're looking for in a donation problem or donation program. Listen to them. If you go in and start pitching them right away and just giving them your spiel without listening to them, a lot of them are going to shut down because they've had problems before. They might tell you it's not going to work. Why? Ask them why. Kind of get to the root of that. Listening is really key. And then in terms of transportation, your food waste, your food rescues, they're going to happen in a highly distributed network. You think about everywhere that's wasting food in the community that you want to serve. Even if you're just serving one neighborhood in a city, there are dozens of places that are wasting food every day. A highly distributed network really benefits from a highly distributed transportation system. You can certainly start with a fleet, but buying a truck is expensive, renting a truck is expensive. And especially at the beginning, you probably don't need a truck to pick up the amount of rescues that you're going to have. And it can be super inefficient. If you're going to 27 different places in a given day that are all over the place, a truck may not be the best choice for that. So volunteers is a great way to get around that. And you may stick with volunteers, you may decide to go to a different model, but it is a really flexible transportation network to start your food recovery organization with. It can help you kind of build your capacity to rescue in other ways, if that's the direction you want to go. And then that distribution network. You will need more food distributors than you think. I cannot stress this enough. There's too much food for pantries and shelters, and pantries and shelters do not have operating hours, especially pantries, that are amenable to the amount of food that's recovered in a given area. Most pantries serve a geographic area, so there may not be a whole bunch in one geographic area. They're highly dispersed, right? And they are open only a couple hours a day, one day, 3 days a week, usually at most. In some places that's different. There might be an area of high need that has a 7-day-a-week pantry, but for the most part, pantries are not open all the time, and they can only handle so much food a month, especially fresh food. When you're picking up fresh food, highly perishable food daily, you're going to need a much broader distribution network. And so that's where those housing authorities come in. That's where those organizations that aren't necessarily food security organizations, but are serving people who are food insecure comes in. You need somebody that can take food now, not tomorrow, not by appointment, not next week, now. That is the key to food recovery. And so that distribution network needs to be bigger than you probably think to start out with, robust and very flexible to cover all hours of the day. Well, you don't have to do nighttime. That's pretty rare, but 7 days a week is super helpful. Full 9 to 5 capacity is really important. And different sizes, because you're going to get sometimes palletized food. You're going to get huge donations of one thing a pallet of hot dog buns, a pallet of cucumbers. Like neither one of those is a donation that can go to a small local food pantry, right? But then you're also going to get a tray of sandwiches and a, massive housing site that has 500 families. That tray of sandwiches is not a good donation for there. It could cause strife and it's not going to make a dent. So really flexible network is important. And then finally, from the jump, start tracking your data, right? Just a spreadsheet is fine to begin with. Just make sure you're capturing, where you're picking stuff up, how much was picked up, what it was, where it went, and who picked it up. That's sort of the basic sort of like bottom line data that you need. That's really important. That is going to help you tell your story to financial donors, to media, to volunteers, to food donors, and to nonprofit partners. It is critical that you start getting that data. And sure, like, does it matter that we rescued 20 pounds of food on February 28th in 2015? Like, not so much, but it's part of building that pool of data that lets you tell that story. If you ignore a couple months of sporadic data, you have nothing to tell anybody, right? And it also shows that you are serious and that you are, I was going to say organized, but data focused, right? That you understand what you need to know in order to scale and do this better. So going into a donor and being able to say, yeah, we've already done, 50 rescues in the last 4 months. We've rescued X amount of pounds. They're going to know that you are growth oriented. So even if it's just a little bit, even if it's sporadic, start tracking that data early on. And so with that, that is sort of your basic introductory framework to getting started on building a high impact food recovery organization. You can certainly do it different ways, but I think these are some tried and true tips. This isn't just what 412 Food Rescue did. It's what we've seen a lot of our startup nonprofit partners, our food recovery hero partners do around the country. It's what organizations that I've talked to and other places have done. These are some battle tested tips and strategies for avoiding some of the mistakes that we've all made. Next month, we're going to talk about funding. Again, that's super critical. We're going to tackle this from two directions. So one, we're going to look at some, advice from fundraising professionals, some folks who really understand, what grantees are looking for, what foundations are looking for, what's the proper mix, how to go about that. We're also going to talk to some folks who've done it. And so Lori Martin from Havens Harvest is going to be our guest. Lori has single-handedly grown Havens Harvest in Connecticut for the last, 20, 30 years. She's incredible. She's a founder. And we're going to talk about some real tricks and tips as well. Some sort of like pull yourself up by the bootstraps, kind of flying the airplane as you're building the airplane as you're flying it, tips for funding as well. So I think both of those perspectives are really important. And then we also have a webinar the week before that, which might be of interest. And I know we're going to talk about this later from a startup perspective, but we're going to talk about maximizing your board's potential for organizations that already have a board. But I think there'll be some great insight in that as well. And that is February 20th. So those are two webinars coming up next month. With that, I am going to, stop sharing my screen and we can answer any questions that you have. Oops, nope. If I can do it without hanging up. Okay, so I see there are no questions in the chat. My goodness. Or in the Q&A. Are there any other questions from the folks that are on the line that you didn't drop into the chat yet? I'd love to hear if some of you folks are in the process of starting a food rescue organization, if you're just thinking about it, where you are in that journey. Here's a question. Great. This is from our friends at Food Rescue US. I see, Carol, you've raised your hand if you want to drop it in the chat. Hi, Haley. Haley's great. She asks, what do you think are key skills or traits that are important food recovery leaders looking to start their own program? I really think an entrepreneurial spirit is important, a willingness to not know exactly what you're doing. When you start an org, even if there's a lot of great examples out there, even if there's a step-by-step manual, the truth is, nobody really knows everything. It's not going to go as planned. Things aren't always going to go smoothly. There's going to be, hiccups, and you're going to have to make decisions on the fly. You're going to have to solve problems that come out of the blue. I mean, being a really good problem solver is super helpful. So I think that's really important for anybody that's starting up anything. I think if you're going to start a food recovery organization, it's and this is probably true for any nonprofit, it's really key to be passionate about it, to really want to make an impact and a difference in the field that you're starting up in. Starting an org is a lot of work. It's an act of faith. You're jumping into the abyss. Starting an org and then hiring somebody is really scary because now you've taken on, it's like having a kid. It's like taking on responsibility for their well-being. It's terrifying. And so you've really got to be passionate about it and willing to take that risk and to be that leader. And that is best done by somebody who really cares about a topic, because if you are super passionate about what you're doing, I'm not going to say it's not a job, because it is, but it makes it a lot easier to take that phone call at 10 o'clock at night when you have somebody that's donating food and you want to make sure you get it, or work every weekend for a year because there's food to be rescued. Like that's the hard stuff. I will say also, early on, it can be really important to do things that maybe you wouldn't do later. So, for example, that 10 o'clock at night phone call, we really figured out that we don't need to rescue food at 10 o'clock at night most times. We just build the relationships with our caterers and the folks who are likely to have late donations, and they hold it for us for the next day. Or if they think they're going to have late donations, we can make arrangements in advance. And so there's a volunteer or somebody that's ready to get that. You're not scrambling late at night on a Friday to figure it out. But early on, doing some of those things that, again, you wouldn't do, they're not advisable as standard procedure, can help build that trust and build that track record, and get you to the point where you can say, okay, hold on, we're not going to work Friday nights. Like, it just doesn't make sense. There's, it's not sensible. We have a better way to do it. I see some things in the chat. Let's see. So Akila says, thinking about starting for the children in my school district. That's amazing. Now, so what are you thinking about doing? Rescuing food to get to the kids, like via backpack program, or what's your distribution method? That's the question I would ask for Akila, and you don't have to have an answer. I don't want to put you on the spot, but that's something to kind of think through what that distribution method is going to be. And the other thing about startup, I would say, is just because somebody's telling you it has to be done one way, or this is the best way to do it, be willing to think outside the box. Maybe that's not going to work in your area. Maybe there's something better. Really think about what's going to work for the donors that you're picking up from and for the population that you're serving. Really making sure that you're serving that population in a way that's going to work for them. Right. Hungry children always sent to the nurse's office. Boy, I get that. And we've worked with schools and we've worked with backpack programs. One of the things that we found, for example, with backpack programs is a lot of folks wanted to like donate canned tuna or something, but not every household has a can opener. So you need to give the kids something that, one, they can carry home, two, they can eat without prepping it without having to cook or microwave it or open it in any special way. And 3, that's not going to go bad. So really understand how the folks you're serving need to be served in order to have an impact. So I'm just going to read Dr. Crothers' statement out loud. She had no idea the cycle of food and food pantries and food rescue. Your organization is looking to see how we can fit in and help. We received a cold call from a company asking us if we could use the food, and that started us thinking. I'd love to hear what kind of org you are talking about. What are you doing in general? For small amounts, and one-offs, pantries are a great source. But if you're really looking at growing food distribution or growing how much food you're rescuing, the pantries just aren't going to be able to absorb it all. And they're the first ones that would tell you that. Eventually, they'll just say, no, we can't take that. That's going to turn into garbage at our location if you give us that much. You think about, you get 2 pallets of lettuce donated or cucumbers. You can't do anything with lettuce or cucumbers aside eat them quickly. You can't cook them. It's basically salad, right? So the distribution network has to be able to take that and get it into people's hands to use immediately. There's no downtime. You can't wait a week for a pantry to open. You can't really even wait 3 days for a pantry to open in a lot of cases because the food will go bad. All right. Other questions or comments? Well, I sincerely hope that some of you on here end up following this up and starting your food recovery organization. We're super excited to have more food recovery organizations join the fray. There's a growing network of orgs. When we started in 2015, there were very few. I mean, there were some. There have been plenty that have been around forever, but there were very few that were really looking to scale food recovery. And now it's become super common. And I think that's because it's a great solution to multiple problems. And Randy Rosen, I did not put your website on here, and I'm sorry. Randy Rosen has a website called The Food Rescue Dude. And let me tell you, it is amazing. There are so many great resources on there. I am sorry, Randy. We will add that in the email when we send this out because it is an incredible resource, and I should have put that on there. Yeah, thank you, Randy. We'll put it in the email too for folks who are looking at this after the fact. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And I hope to see you at the next couple of webinars. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email. My email is jen@412foodrescue.org or jen@foodrescuehero.org. I think there's some links in the chat for signing up for the next rescue or next webinar or for contacting us later. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. Good luck.